Introduction, Awakening in the Abyss. Let us begin by making a pact. A pact of absolute, unflinching honesty. We must agree, you and I, to dispense with the 1,000 polite fictions that scaffold our daily interactions, because those fictions are the very sedative that keeps us asleep. They are the comforting murmur in the waiting room of a terminal diagnosis. And make no mistake, the diagnosis is terminal. This is not a threat. It is a description of the baseline reality of the human condition, a reality that we have, as a culture, conspired to paper over with a desperate and pathological optimism. You see it in the narcotizing fantasies of our entertainment, you hear it in the shallow pronouncements of our therapeutic pop gurus, you feel it in the cloying, infantilizing embrace of a society that whispers the most dangerous lie of all, that you have a right to be happy. That is a venomous idea. It is a lie so profound, so antithetical to the structure of being itself, that it is capable of corroding the soul from the inside out. So let's dispense with it. Let's dispense with all of it. This book is not a comfort. It is not a shelter. It is a pickaxe, designed to shatter the fraudulent foundations upon which your current worldview may well be built. And I can tell you, that is a painful process. It is a necessary demolition. Because what is the alternative? The alternative is to remain in a house built on sand, smiling vacuously as the tide of reality rises around your ankles. The alternative is a living damnation. So, what is the terrible truth that we have so assiduously sought to avoid? What is the dragon that guards the gateway to all genuine meaning? It is this, and you have to let this sink into the very marrow of your bones. Conscious being, at its absolute foundation, is an experience of profound, structural, and inescapable suffering. Now, what do we mean by that? This isn't a poetic flourish. This is a technical description. Your nervous system, for starters, is not a mechanism for the acquisition of bliss. It is a threat detection apparatus, honed to a razor's edge by a billion-year-long arms race of bloody, brutal, carnivorous survival. The default state of that system is not calm satisfaction, it is a low-level, vigilant anxiety, perpetually scanning the horizon for the predator that is, archetypally speaking, always there. That fleeting feeling you call happiness? That's a momentary, neurological all-clear signal. It's the sigh of relief your ancestral circuitry breathes when it realizes you haven't been eaten in the last 5 minutes. That's it. To demand that this state be permanent is a form of madness. It is to demand that a fire alarm be silent in a burning building. And that's just the biological substrate. It gets worse. Because perched atop that ancient, reptilian architecture is the great and terrible gift of human self-consciousness. And what did that gift provide us? Look at the ancient stories. They are maps of the human psyche, and they are deadly serious. Look at Genesis. We were naked in the garden, unconscious of our own vulnerability, like animals. And then the serpent, the archetypal representation of the unknown, of that which lurks beyond the boundary of our competence, offers us the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in that moment of partaking, we fall upwards into self-awareness. And what is the immediate consequence? We open our eyes, and the very first thing we realize is that we are naked. Vulnerable. Fragile. Mortal. We are expelled from the unconscious paradise of the animal mind and thrown, and it is a throwing, a Heideggerian Gewerfenheit of catastrophic proportions, into the brutal reality of history, toil, and the foreknowledge of our own death. That is the price of consciousness. It is the price of becoming like God. You get to see everything, but you also have to bear the terror of that vision. And if that wasn't enough, you find yourself thrown into a world populated by other fallen creatures, each of them contending with their own suffering, their own fragility, and, more terrifyingly, their own capacity for malevolence. You are not merely a vulnerable creature in a world of indifferent nature. You are a target in a world rife with the very real, very active desire to harm, to betray, to tyrannize, and to destroy. And if you haven't contended with the fact that this malevolence exists not just in others, but in the darkest, most secret corners of your own heart, the Cain that lurks within every Abel, then you are not merely naive, you are a danger to yourself and to everyone around you. So, what are we to do? What is the proper response to a diagnosis this grim? Well, the modern world offers two primary escape routes, two great heresies that function as pathologies of refusal. The first is the pathology of unearned grace. This is the siren song of the shallow optimist, the hedonist, the consumer. It tells you that the pain is an illusion, a cognitive error, a chemical imbalance that can be medicated or mediated away. It tells you to think positive, to follow your bliss, to construct a cocoon of pleasant distractions and deny the reality of the abyss. This path turns a man into a child, a perpetually hungry ghost chasing fleeting pleasures, leaving him weak, brittle, and utterly unprepared for the inevitable moment when tragedy kicks in his door, as it will. The second, and perhaps more sophisticated, pathology is the dogma of resentful deconstruction. This is the posture of the disappointed idealist who, having realized that the world is built on a bedrock of suffering and strife, declares the entire game to be rigged. This is the posture of the nihilist. He looks at the hierarchies of competence and sees only oppression. He looks at the traditions of the past and sees only a history of crime. And in his bitterness, in his ressentiment, he seeks not to build, but to tear down. He uses his intellect as a weapon of critique, to deconstruct, to dismantle, to burn, arguing that if the world cannot be a perfect heaven, then it is better that it be a cleansing hell. It is the voice of Cain, whispering, "If I cannot have what I want, I will ensure that no one has anything at all." This book is a rejection of both of those paths. It is an argument for a third way. The difficult way. The narrow path. And the methodology for this path is a radical form of phenomenology. Now, that's a $5 word, but its meaning is simple and vital. It means we must start with the primacy of direct experience. We must have the courage to look at the thing itself, the raw, unmediated data of our own conscious experience, particularly the experiences we would most like to avoid, our suffering, our anxiety, our limitations, our shame, our capacity for evil. We must examine this data without the distorting lens of a prepackaged ideology that tells us what we should be seeing. We must become ruthless cartographers of our own souls. And why? Because in that unflinching examination, the path forward reveals itself. It is not a path of escape. It is a path of confrontation. It is the voluntary assumption of a necessary burden. It is the discovery that meaning in life is not found in the avoidance of suffering, but in the finding of a suffering that is so worthwhile, so noble, that you are willing to bear it. This is the great, central, heroic secret of mankind. It is the realization that the only way to endure the crushing burden of being is to pick up your own particular, individualized cross and carry it with courage and intent. This, then, is our task. To explore the alchemy by which suffering, when voluntarily confronted, is transfigured into meaning. To demonstrate how the heaviest burdens, when shouldered with nobility, become the very anchors that give our lives weight and purpose. This is not a self-help book. It is a demand. It is a challenge to stop seeking happiness and to start seeking a burden that is worthy of your life. It is a terrible, necessary journey into the heart of darkness, because it is only there, in the deepest part of the abyss, that we can find the light worth bearing. If you are not prepared for such a journey, then for God's sake, put this book down now. For the rest of us, the work begins. Part 1, The Default Condition, on the Architecture of Agony. Chapter 1, The Foundational Catastrophe, on the Inescapable Nature of Suffering. The biological mandate, your body is not your friend. First, let us have the courage to descend into the bloody, grinding engine room of life itself, our evolutionary biology. You harbor a secret belief, don't you? A belief that your body, your nervous system, is fundamentally on your side, a finely tuned instrument for the production of joy and contentment. What a staggering, breathtaking piece of narcissistic blindness. Your body is not your friend, it is a haunted biological vessel, a temporary survival machine cobbled together over a 3 billion year-long holocaust by the merciless, blind, and utterly indifferent process of natural selection. It is a temporary ark for the propagation of your genetic information, and its prime directive is not your personal happiness, but its own ruthless, relentless perpetuation. And its primary tool, its language, its very medium of communication, is pain. Consider the neurochemical reality. That dopamine hit you crave is not a happy molecule. It is the chemical of pursuit, of striving, of wanting. It is the goad that drove your ancestors across the savannah in desperate search of a kill, and the thing that keeps you scrolling endlessly through the digital abyss of your phone. It promises satisfaction but delivers only the desire for more. Serotonin? Its primary role is to regulate your position within the dominance hierarchy, the brutal social ladder that determines access to resources, mates, and safety. A lack of it doesn't just feel bad, it signals a plummet down that hierarchy, a slide towards the vulnerable periphery where the predators, both literal and metaphorical, do their hunting. Anxiety is not a disorder, it is the sentinel at the gates of your existence, a hypersensitive seismograph calibrated to detect the faintest tremor of impending catastrophe. Fear is not a pathology, it is the deafening alarm bell that signals the omnipresent threat of pain, dissolution, and annihilation. The entire architecture of your subjective experience is a threat detection system. The capacity for negative emotion is the feature, the killer app, so to speak, that allowed your lineage to claw its way through the charnel house of evolutionary history. The ones who were happy-go-lucky, the ones who were not perpetually vigilant for the snapping of a twig or the shadow in the long grass, their genes were devoured along with their flesh. You are the direct descendant of the paranoid, the anxious, the perpetually unsettled, the ones who saw a predator behind every rock. Their terror is your inheritance. It sings in your blood and hums in your nerves. To pathologize this inheritance, to attempt to medicate it into a state of placid submission as if it were an inconvenient aberration, is an act of breathtaking arrogance. It is to spit on the graves of 1 billion of your own ancestors. It is an act of profound historical and biological ignorance. Nature is not a benevolent mother goddess. She is the great devourer, the horrifyingly creative artist of death and predation, and you are one of her fragile, temporary masterpieces, sculpted from fear and designed to suffer exquisitely for the sake of one more day's survival. Life feeds on life. That is not a bog in the system. It is the system. The theological echo, the metaphysics of the fall. If the cold, mechanical brutality of the biological perspective fails to pierce your armor of denial, let us then turn to the scalding heat of our deepest theological structures. Why has virtually every significant human culture felt compelled to produce a story of a fall? A myth of some primordial catastrophe that fractured the world and poisoned the human soul? From the Mesopotamian Enuma Elish to the Norse Ragnarok, from the Zoroastrian dualism of light and dark to the Abrahamic expulsion from Eden, is it a mass delusion? Or is it a staggeringly sophisticated psychological insight, a metaphorical mapping of an inescapable truth about the structure of consciousness? Consider the doctrine of original sin. The modern, secular mind, in its smug and superficial wisdom, dismisses this as a superstitious tool of priestly oppression. What a pathetic misreading! It has nothing to do with a literal transgression involving a talking snake and an apple. It is a profound phenomenological description of the human condition. It is the recognition that every single human being is born into the world fundamentally flawed, intrinsically limited, possessing a terrifying capacity for genuine malevolence, the shadow, the Jungian archetype of the predator within, the Cain that lurks in the heart of every Abel, and subject to forces of decay and mortality far beyond their control. Original sin is the profound acknowledgement that you do not start from a position of clean, perfect potential. You start in debt. You are born into a game that is already rigged, not by some cosmic tyrant, but by the very nature of conscious existence. You are thrown into a world you did not create, into a body you did not choose, bearing the accumulated weight of the sins and sacrifices of every generation that preceded you. And, most terribly, you are burdened with a form of consciousness that, once awakened, immediately recognizes the horror of the situation. That is the fall. It is not a fall from grace, but an excruciating fall upwards into self-awareness, the moment you lose the ignorant bliss of the animal and realize that you are naked, vulnerable, and destined for the dust. These theological maps are not antiquated superstitions to be mocked. They are the distilled, brutal wisdom of countless generations who were honest enough to carve the truth into stone. The world is broken, and we are the primary agents and victims of that brokenness. The existential verdict, condemned to freedom. Finally, let us strip away even the comfort of these grand, ancient narratives and turn to the brave, clear-eyed philosophers of existentialism, who had the courage to confront the raw data of this reality without a divine safety net. What did they find? They stared into the abyss and gave it a name, the absurd. Camus described it with chilling precision. The absurd is the violent, irreconcilable clash, the permanent divorce, between man's innate, desperate, soul-deep longing for meaning, reason, and order, and the cold, silent, unreasonable, and utterly indifferent universe. We are meaning-seeking creatures adrift in a meaningless cosmos. We scream our questions of why into the void, and the void, with terrifying consistency, does not answer. And if that gaping silence wasn't horrifying enough, Sartre informs us that we are, as a consequence, condemned to be free. Nietzsche had already sounded the alarm a generation prior: God is dead. But this was no cry of triumph. It was a cry of terror. The death of God meant the evaporation of the ultimate horizon, the shattering of the transcendent anchor that gave Western civilization its moral and metaphysical orientation. And in its place, nothing. A void. An infinite, terrifying freedom. There is no preordained essence, no cosmic rulebook, no heavenly Father to pat you on the head and tell you you've been a good boy. We are terrifyingly, absolutely responsible for creating our own values, for justifying our own existence, from nothing, moment by moment. This freedom is not a liberation, it is a dizzying, crushing burden. It is the vertigo that Kierkegaard called angst, the dizziness of freedom, the paralyzing realization of your limitless possibility combined with your absolute finitude. It is the anguish of knowing that your life's meaning rests on a foundation of pure, terrifying, arbitrary choice, with no safety net below. So, here we stand, at the confluence of these three great, terrible rivers of truth. Biology tells us we are fragile survival machines built from and for suffering. Theology tells us we are fallen, flawed creatures in a fractured world of our own making. Existentialism tells us we are meaning-hungry beings stranded in a meaningless void, crushed by a freedom we cannot escape. If you can stare at this tripartite verdict, this ironclad, interlocking, inescapable case for the tragic structure of reality, and still cling to the infantile notion that suffering is a mistake, an anomaly to be corrected, then you are not yet ready for the task at hand. You are still dreaming in the matrix. This is the foundational catastrophe. It is not a singular event in the distant past, it is the permanent, structural reality of our being. And acknowledging it, truly, deeply, down to the soles of your feet, is not the end of the journey. It is the gate. It is the necessary, terrifying, first step into adulthood. Because it is only when you accept the utter hopelessness of your situation that you can begin the work of generating an authentic hope. It is only when you stare unblinkingly into the abyss that you can find the materials to build a bridge across it. The question is not, and has never been, how we escape this catastrophe. The question is, how must we live within it? The psychological price of delusion, on the generation of hell. What happens, then, to the individual, or, more frighteningly, to the culture, that refuses to take this first step? What is the consequence of refusing to walk through the date of tragic acknowledgement? The consequence is not a peaceful stasis. The consequence is the active, passionate, and meticulous construction of a personalized hell. Because to deny the fundamental nature of reality is to declare war on being itself, and that is a war you cannot win. You can, however, generate limitless collateral damage in the losing of it. The primary pathology that arises from this denial is a profound and incurable ontological fragility. The individual who builds their identity on the premise that life should be fair, or that they have a right to happiness, is constructing a house of glass on a seismic fault line. The first tremor of genuine tragedy, a betrayal, a serious illness, a failure, the death of a loved one, does not merely cause them pain. It shatters their entire worldview. Their naive metaphysical assumptions are revealed as the pathetic delusions they are, and the individual collapses into a state of shock and confusion. Their suffering is amplified 1,000-fold because it is not just suffering, it is unjust suffering. It is a violation of the universe's imagined contract with them. And what crawls from the rubble of this shattered worldview? The serpent of resentment. Ressentiment, as Nietzsche diagnosed it with such terrifying clarity, is the posture of the weak and the defeated who cannot admit their own inadequacy in the face of life's brutality. It is a poisonous spiritual secretion. The resentful mind, unwilling to blame its own flawed premises, must find a scapegoat. The world is unfair. The system is rigged. It is the fault of my parents, of the rich, of society, of the patriarchy, of God himself. The resentful individual becomes an accuser, pointing a trembling, self-righteous finger at being, demanding an apology for its very existence. This is the psychological state that turns a man into a whispering revolutionary, a bitter critic who can only destroy because he lacks the character to build. From here, it is a very short step to the full-blown ideological possession of the utopian temptation. Resentment, when it gathers enough social momentum, hardens into an ideology. This ideology invariably promises a final solution to the problem of human suffering. It identifies the scapegoat class or system and promises that, once this enemy is eliminated, we will finally usher in the kingdom of heaven on earth. This is the logic of the Jacobins, the Bolsheviks, the National Socialists, and every other totalitarian horror of the last 2 centuries. They are all powered by the same deluded premise, that human suffering is a political or economic problem that can be solved by the sufficient application of force and the elimination of dissent. They mistake the foundational catastrophe for a mere technical glitch. In their attempt to fix it, to warp reality to fit their impossible ideal, they create a hell on earth that is infinitely worse than the natural, baseline suffering they sought to escape. They build the gulag and the gas chamber as monuments to their refusal to accept the tragic nature of life. So make no mistake. The refusal to stare into the abyss of natural suffering does not grant you a reprieve. It sentences you to something far worse. It locks you into a prison of your own making, a cell of resentment, fragility, and ideological rage. It ensures that when the tragedies of life arrive, as they will be utterly unprepared, armed only with a sense of victimhood and a list of enemies to blame. The confrontation with the foundational catastrophe is not an optional exercise for the morbidly inclined. It is the fundamental, non-negotiable prerequisite for sanity. It is the choice between the clean, terrible truth of reality and the festering, self-made hells of delusion. Chapter 2, The Serpent in the Garden, Acknowledging the Metaphysics of Malevolence. If you have managed to absorb the brutal truth of the previous chapter, if you have truly integrated the idea that your existence is grounded in a baseline of structural, unavoidable suffering, and have not fled from that terrible knowledge, you may believe you have reached the nadir. You may feel that in staring into the indifferent, grinding gears of the cosmos, you have seen the worst of it. You may be tempted to take a breath, to steady yourself on this new, barren ground. That would be a catastrophic error. Because what we have confronted thus far was merely the horror of the abyss. We must now confront the horror of the demon that inhabits it. The suffering of finitude, the foundational catastrophe, is a horror of sublime and terrible impersonality. The earthquake does not hate you, it is the groaning of tectonic plates, utterly indifferent to the city it pulverizes. The cancer cell does not bear you personal malice, it is a blind, replicative error, a mindless process of entropy playing out within the theater of your own flesh. The hurricane has no ideological grievance against the coastline it scours clean. This is the horror of the world as a machine without a ghost, a vast, grinding, impersonal apparatus of dissolution. And while contending with this is a Herculean task in itself, it is a task a sufficiently stoic soul can, in principle, bear. It is possible, just barely, to find a noble, tragic dignity in facing down an indifferent universe. It is another thing entirely to face down a universe that is not indifferent. A universe in which the ghost in the machine looks you squarely in the eye, notes your deepest vulnerabilities, and then, with intelligent precision and a chilling smile, sets about the work of destroying you. This is the second, and far more terrible, serpent in the garden. The first serpent is the latent chaos of nature, the dragon of the unknown that lies outside the village walls. The second serpent is the one that has already slithered inside the human heart. It is not the problem of suffering we must now confront, it is the problem of evil. And evil is not the mere absence of good, any more than a black hole is the mere absence of matter. It is an active, energetic, creative, and even seductive force. It is the conscious and voluntary desire to make things worse. It is the will to inflict unnecessary suffering, to propagate chaos, to betray, to torture, and to degrade, not as a means to some other end, but as an end in itself. It is, in the final, terrifying analysis, a rebellion against the arduous miracle of being in favor of the easy gratification of nothingness. The cowardice of the modern mind. To fail to distinguish between these two forms of agony, the tragedy of finitude and the active malice of evil, is the single greatest intellectual and moral failure of the modern age. It is the primary source of our collective, debilitating neurosis. We have become so saturated in a shallow, therapeutic worldview that we have lost the very category of evil. We have explained it away with a swarm of exculpatory isms. We are told that evil is a construct of oppressive power structures, a symptom of economic inequality, a product of unresolved childhood trauma. The commandant of Auschwitz, in our modern psychologized retelling, becomes a mere product of his circumstances, a cog in a bureaucratic machine, a victim of a poor upbringing or a prevailing ideology. Listen to those explanations. Do you feel the deep intellectual cowardice lurking within them? It is the desperate attempt to maintain a vision of humanity as fundamentally good, as a noble savage corrupted only by external forces. It is the refusal to accept the horrifying possibility that people do terrible things not because they are broken, but because they are exercising a capacity that is intrinsic to the human spirit. We perform these intellectual gymnastics because we are terrified to confront the alternative, the far more monstrous and accurate explanation, that the men who ran the death camps, the men who starved the kulaks, the men who hacked their neighbors to pieces in Rwanda, did so not because they were automatons, but because they were human beings who discovered a capacity for infinite cruelty within themselves, and chose to exercise it. And here is the part that should truly stop your heart. Many of them, in the darkest recesses of their souls, found it deeply, horribly meaningful. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who stared into the very soul of this beast in the Gulag, wrote, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart." He understood. He knew that the architects of the Gulag were not a different species. They were men. Men who embraced the serpent. This is the metaphysical reality of malevolence. It is not a glitch in the system, it is a feature of conscious existence. The same self-awareness that allows for heroism, love, and sacrifice also opens the door to its demonic opposite. Look again at the story of Cain and Abel, the first story after the fall. It is not a story about impersonal tragedy. Cain is not a victim of circumstance. He makes a sacrifice to God that is rejected. Why? The ancient texts imply it was a second-rate offering, given with a resentful heart. He performs his duty, but he does so grudgingly, without genuine commitment. His brother Abel, by contrast, brings the very best of his flock. And his sacrifice is accepted. God is not arbitrary. God is the symbolic representation of the structure of reality, and reality rewards wholehearted, courageous effort. It does not reward resentful, minimal compliance. Faced with this judgment, this accurate reflection of his own spiritual inadequacy, Cain is overcome with bitterness. And God speaks to him directly, warning him in the most precise psychological terms imaginable. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This is a perfect diagram. Cain is faced with a choice. He could look at his successful brother and think, my brother knows something I do not. I will humble myself, emulate his success, and improve the quality of my own sacrifice. That is the difficult path of redemption. That is the heroic path. But there is another path. An easier path. He can eliminate the standard of judgment itself. He can destroy the good that, by its very existence, makes him feel inferior. And so he chooses to destroy. He knew what he was doing was wrong. God himself told him so. He chose it anyway. That is the birth of genuine human evil. It is the primordial act of resentful murder, the desire to drag being itself down into the mud out of spite. It is the voice that whispers, if I cannot be the best, I will ensure there is no best at all. The serpent in your own heart. Our modern neurosis stems from our refusal to believe that Cain is real, that he is not just a character in a story, but an eternal archetype that lives, seething, in the heart of every person. By insisting that all evil is merely a product of social injustice or psychological trauma, we render ourselves pathologically naive. We walk through the world as unarmed children in a forest full of wolves, believing them to be misunderstood puppies. We cannot comprehend the motivations of the tyrant, the school shooter, the rapist, or the betraying friend, because we refuse to accept their foundational premise, that causing pain can be a source of profound, albeit hellish, satisfaction. And what is the consequence of this naivete? We lose our ability to resist. We engage in a futile and infantilizing dialogue with forces that have no interest in dialogue. We attempt to understand and rehabilitate that which has no desire to be understood or rehabilitated, only to conquer and destroy. We mistake the crocodile, slowly closing its jaws on our leg, for a negotiating partner. And worse, infinitely worse, in our refusal to see the serpent in the world, we become utterly blind to its presence within ourselves. So you must ask yourself, and you must answer with a level of honesty that might sicken you. Have you never felt the hot, intoxicating flush of genuine resentment? Have you never, in the face of another's genuine and deserved success, secretly wished for their failure? Have you never nursed a grievance, replaying an injury in your mind, polishing it, savoring the righteous indignation it provides like a treasured stone? Have you never taken a kind of grim, secret satisfaction in the downfall of a rival? Have you never said something you knew to be exquisitely cruel, for the sheer, momentary, godlike pleasure of its sting? Have you never betrayed a trust, ever so slightly, because it was convenient? If you say no to all of this, you are not a good person. You are a liar. And you are a danger to yourself and everyone around you, because you have no idea what you are capable of. That dark impulse you deny, that little thrill of spite, that warmth of self-pity, that secret pleasure in judgment, that is the serpent's egg. That is the seed of Cain within you. And to deny its existence is to guarantee that it will grow in the darkness of your unconscious, untended and unacknowledged, until one day, when you are weak and cornered, it hatches. And you will be the last one to know what has been unleashed. Therefore, acknowledging the metaphysics of malevolence is not an invitation to cynicism or despair. It is the opposite. It is an act of profound moral courage. It is the development of a necessary immune system for the soul. It is the only way to truly understand the world as it is, and the only way to properly orient yourself within it. You cannot fight a monster you do not believe exists. And you certainly cannot hope to control the monster in your own heart if you refuse to even look it in the eye. We have now seen both serpents. The first is the indifferent chaos of a tragic world. The second is the focused, intelligent, and hateful malice of the human heart that seeks to make that tragedy infinitely worse. To stand up straight, with your shoulders back, means to accept the reality of both. It means to build your life on the bedrock of this terrible truth, rather than on the shifting sands of utopian delusion. Only then can we even begin to ask the next, and most important, question: what is to be done about it? Chapter 3, The Tyranny of the Corpse, Mortality and the Collapse of Finite Horizons. We have now navigated two of the great, terrible concentric circles of existence. The first was the indifferent, grinding machinery of the cosmos, the foundational catastrophe. The second was the focused, intelligent malice of the human heart, the serpent in the garden. If you are still here, if you have not retreated from these truths, then you have demonstrated a capacity for a certain kind of fortitude. You have looked upon the macro-horror of the world and the micro-horror of the soul. You have withstood the storm and the viper. But there is a third horror, a third dragon coiled at the very center of the labyrinth of being, and this one is different. It is not external to you, like the hurricane. It is not a mere potential within you that you might struggle to master, like the spirit of Cain. It is an absolute, metaphysical certainty. It is a horror so intimate, so profoundly a part of you, that you carry it every moment of every day. It is the silent passenger in the vessel of your body, the uninvited guest at every feast, the final creditor to whom your every breath is a debt. It is the knowledge of your own future decomposition. It is the tyranny of the corpse. This is not a poetic flourish. Let's be deadly serious about this. It is the most brutally literal truth of your life. There is a corpse in your future, and it has your name on it. And the knowledge of this fact, once it is truly apprehended by the conscious mind, not as an abstract proposition, but as a felt reality, acts as a kind of universal acid. It is a metaphysical solvent that eats through every simplistic value structure, every naive ambition, every comforting delusion you have ever constructed to shield yourself from the sheer, howling terror of your own finitude. The great severance, when the animal looks in the mirror. To understand the depth of this tyranny, you must first appreciate the chasm of consciousness that separates the human condition from that of all other creatures. An animal lives in what we might call a state of pure immanence. It is entirely within the world, a seamless part of its brutal, beautiful tapestry. A gazelle feels fear, yes, the immediate, electric terror of the lion scent on the wind. It is a response to a clear and present danger. But it does not feel dread. Dread is a uniquely human affliction. It is a sickness of the future tense. Dread is the discovery that the ultimate predator is not out there, in the tall grass, but inside you, woven into the very fabric of time itself. The ultimate predator is not an event that might happen, it is an appointment that will be kept. When did this knowledge first dawn on you? It was likely a moment in childhood, a crack in the pristine surface of reality. Perhaps it was the sight of a dead bird, its stillness a profound violation of the natural order, an object where a subject used to be. Perhaps it was the hushed, funereal tones of your parents discussing a relative's passing, a tone that communicated a gravity your young mind could not yet parse but could certainly feel. In that moment, you underwent what the philosopher Martin Heidegger identified as the fundamental constitution of human being, Dacian. You became a being towards death, sein zum Tod, a being for whom your own finitude is a constant and defining issue. You grasped, however dimly, that the story of your life was not an endless adventure, but a book with a final page, a page that had already been written, even if the ink was not yet dry. In that moment, you were severed from the eternal present of the animal kingdom. You ate the fruit from the second tree of knowledge, the knowledge of your own ending, and were cast out of the garden of blissful ignorance forever. You were initiated into the terrible secret society of the mortal. This awakening is not a single event but a continuous psychic process, a low-frequency hum beneath the noise of your daily life. It is the skull that grins at you from behind the face of your lover in a moment of intimacy. It is the flicker of decay you see in your own reflection in the morning mirror. It is the sudden, gut-wrenching, vertiginous realization, while performing some mundane task, that one day you will perform this task for the last time, and you will not know that it is the last time. This constant, subliminal awareness is the tyrant. And its role is absolute. It holds a veto over every single one of your projects. It appends a final, silent footnote to every achievement, and then you die. The universal acid and the dissolution of finite worlds. How, precisely, does this tyrant exercise its power? It does so by secreting this universal acid of mortality, which relentlessly dissolves the seemingly solid structures upon which you build your life. Let us examine this corrosive process with the care it deserves. First, the acid dissolves wealth and possession. You spend your life accumulating resources, building a fortress of material security against the chaos of the world. This is a deeply rooted, primordial impulse. And the tyrant laughs a hollow, rattling laugh. It is the ancient wisdom of memento mori, the skull on the philosopher's desk, reminding him that his gold and his books will be inherited by worms or squabbling, ungrateful relatives. But the triviality of the phrase, "you can't take it with you," masks the true horror. The real, corrosive power of the acid is not that you lose your possessions at death, but that the pursuit of them becomes, in the light of death, a potentially absurd and tragic misallocation of your single, finite, unrepeatable life. The knowledge of death reveals the man counting his gold as a madman counting cards on a sinking ship, utterly oblivious to the rising water. It exposes the frantic energy of acquisition as a form of neurosis, a desperate attempt to build a wall against a flood that is already inside the house. Next, it dissolves status and social hierarchy. You climb the treacherous ladder of social dominance, a structure as ancient as the lobster's nervous system. You crave the admiration of your peers, the validation of your superiors, the envy of your rivals. You sacrifice your time, your integrity, your very soul, for a higher position on the pyramid. You trade the authenticity of your being for the social performance of a role. And the tyrant whispers, the skull of a king is indistinguishable from the skull of a pauper. The applause of the crowd, the corner office, the prestigious title, all of it is a frantic, localized game played in the shadow of the gallows. Death is the great, terrifying democratization. It is the one form of equality that cannot be deconstructed or legislated away. And its silent, looming presence reveals the desperate scrabbling for status as a kind of children's game played for trinkets, a deadly serious game whose ultimate prize is dust. The final judgment of the courts is that your CV will not be read at your funeral. Finally, and most cruelly, it dissolves pleasure and hedonism. Faced with the absurdity of accumulation and status, you might decide to dedicate your life to the pursuit of sensation, to the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain. Carpe diem. You will drink life to the lees. And the tyrant finds this the most pathetic defense of all. Each peak experience is rendered bittersweet, tainted by the iron tang of its own impermanence. The hedonist is not a liberated spirit. He is a man running from his own shadow, desperately trying to drown out the tyrant's voice with noise. The frantic pursuit of the next thrill becomes a flight from the silence in which that voice can be heard most clearly. Every sunset, every fading note of a beautiful song, is not a pure joy but a poignant reminder that the race is already lost. It is a reminder of the abyss that waits to swallow all beauty. The hedonist's frantic quest is not a love of life, but a terror of death, and he ends up tasting neither. The architecture of denial, building castles in the void. Faced with this totalizing dissolution, this triple annihilation of value, the human psyche, in its desperation, erects a series of elaborate defenses. These are the frantic, often heroic, but ultimately inadequate projects we engage in to deny the tyranny of the corpse. As the great cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker argued in his terrifying masterwork, The Denial of Death, all of culture is a vast, shared, symbolic defense mechanism against this raw terror. We can identify several primary forms of this architecture. There is the biological immortality project, the impulse to have children, to project your genetic material into the future. It is a noble and deeply meaningful endeavor, to be sure, a genuine participation in the great chain of being. But as a defense against personal annihilation, it is an immortality by proxy, and a fragile one at that. For you are not your children. Your consciousness, your unique, unrepeatable window on the world, will be extinguished. And your children too will die. Their children will die. And the chain of being stretches forward into a cosmic future that will one day extinguish all life, all memory, all trace of your existence on this pale blue dot. There is the Creative Immortality Project, the attempt to create a symbolic self that will outlast the physical self. You write a book, build a company, discover a scientific principle, or create a work of art. This is the quest for symbolic immortality, the attempt to etch your name onto the wall of history so that the tyrant does not get the final word. And there is real heroism in this, a genuine striving against the void. But from the coldest, most cosmic perspective, this too is a gamble against a stacked deck. Look upon the ruins of Ozymandias, king of kings. The sand stretches far away. What is a 1,000-year reputation to the billion-year timescale of geology? What is a family dynasty to the eventual heat death of the universe? The Immortality Project is a beautiful, tragic monument built on a disappearing shoreline. And then there is the most common and most pathetic defense of all, simple, undiluted distraction. We immerse ourselves in the trivialities of daily life, the petty dramas of the workplace, the endless scroll of social media, the narcotic drip of entertainment. We fill every waking moment with noise and activity, not because these things are meaningful, but precisely because they are not. Their triviality is their function. They are a shield, a buffer zone of meaningless chatter to keep the terrible silence of the void at bay. The modern world, with its digital sensorium, is the most sophisticated engine of death denial ever conceived, a machine for generating an infinite stream of novelties to ensure you never have to spend a single moment alone with your own thoughts, and with the one thought that truly matters. We become, as T.S. Eliot wrote, distracted from distraction by distraction, living lives of quiet desperation, all in service of not having to think about the one thing that is actually true. This confrontation, this stripping away of all finite value, leaves you standing naked before the final, terrible question posed by the tyrant corpse. It is a silent question, but it is the loudest thing you will ever hear. It is the riddle of the Sphinx, and your life is the price of a failed answer. Given that I am your inevitable and absolute end, rendering all your finite achievements, your social status, your pleasures, and your paltry distractions ultimately meaningless, what is the point of doing anything at all? This is not a rhetorical question. It is the central, existential challenge of a conscious, mortal life. To fail to confront it is to live a life of frantic, hollow delusion. To confront it and fall into nihilism is to surrender while you still breathe, to let the tyrant win before the battle has even been joined. The entire project of living a meaningful life, a life of genuine substance and weight, is predicated on finding a satisfactory answer to the tyrant's riddle. An answer so powerful, so profound, that it can stand in the face of absolute annihilation and not be extinguished. We are not yet equipped to provide that answer. We must first walk through the valley of the shadow of death and map its contours completely. For now, it is enough to stand here, in the silence, and allow the full, crushing weight of the question to settle upon you. The tyranny of the corpse is absolute. Your moves. Part 2. The Pathologies of Refusal, Cowardice in the Face of Being. Chapter 4. The Narcotized Soul, Hedonism as a Flight from Reality. Let us be clear about what follows. We have completed our descent. We have mapped the foundational architecture of agony that constitutes the bedrock of being. We have faced the indifferent catastrophe of existence, the active malevolence of the human heart, and the absolute tyranny of the grave. And so the question presents itself, what is the proper response to this unbearable knowledge? Before we can articulate a genuine solution, a path of authentic meaning, we must first clear away the rubble of the false solutions. We must diagnose the pathologies of refusal, the cowardly strategies of flight that are not only doomed to fail but that actively weaken the soul, leaving it more brittle and susceptible to the very horrors it seeks to avoid. The first, and perhaps most seductive, of these pathologies is the one that our entire modern consumer culture is built upon. It is the seemingly reasonable, yet profoundly juvenile, pursuit of happiness as the primary goal of life. It is the philosophy of the narcotized soul. It is the strategy of the hedonist. And it is a flight from reality that guarantees your eventual and catastrophic destruction. The philosophical fraud of happiness. What do you even mean when you use that word, happiness? In the modern parlance, it has been degraded to mean something akin to a state of sustained, low-arousal positive emotion, punctuated by moments of pleasurable excitement. It is comfort. It is entertainment. It is the absence of anxiety and pain. It is, in short, a state of perpetual, blissful distraction. And it is this shallow conception that is held up as the highest good, the very purpose of a well-lived life. What a pathetic and impoverished ambition! The great thinkers of the past would be horrified by such a notion. When Aristotle spoke of eudaimonia, he was not speaking of happiness. He was speaking of flourishing, of human excellence, of the fulfillment of one's highest potential through the virtuous and disciplined application of reason. It was a condition that was often difficult, demanding, and anything but comfortable. It was about becoming, not about feeling. The idea that the ultimate goal of life is to feel good would have struck him as the philosophy of a well-fed animal, not a human being. The pursuit of happiness as a goal is a philosophical fraud because happiness, in the fleeting sense we now understand it, is not a destination. It is a byproduct. It is an occasional and often unpredictable signal that you are momentarily aligned with the proper path of being. It is the feeling of warmth you get when you have acted courageously, spoken truthfully, or shouldered a necessary responsibility. To aim at the feeling itself is to mistake the symptom for the cause. It is like trying to make a car go by endlessly polishing the check engine light, hoping it will turn off, instead of looking at the engine. It is a fundamental misreading of the operational logic of the human soul. The neuropsychological trap, a slave to the machine. This philosophical error is written into our very neurobiology. Your brain is not designed to be happy, it is designed to strive. The dopaminergic pathways that govern your motivation and desire are not satisfied by attainment, they are activated by the pursuit of a goal. Dopamine is the molecule of more. It is the restless, forward-moving impulse that says, "That was good, now what's next?" The hedonist, in chasing pleasure, becomes a slave to this relentless circuitry. He gets the promotion, enjoys a fleeting moment of satisfaction, and is immediately confronted with the next goalpost, the bigger office, the higher salary. He buys the new car, experiences a brief thrill, and within weeks it is just a means of transportation, his desire already alighting on a newer, better model. This is the hedonic treadmill. You are running as fast as you can, chasing a horizon that recedes at your own pace. This is not a path to liberation, it is the very definition of slavery. You are a rat in a cage, endlessly pushing a lever for a pellet of diminishing satisfaction. Your own internal reward system becomes your tyrant. You are training yourself to be a creature of appetites, a bundle of unquenchable desires, rather than the master of your own domain. And a life dedicated to the appeasement of appetites is a life of profound and degrading servitude. It is to voluntarily place the leash of your own neurology around your neck and hand the other end to the most primitive part of your brain. The cultivation of brittleness. Here we arrive at the central, catastrophic consequence of the hedonistic strategy. In its single-minded flight from pain, anxiety, and difficulty, it systematically dismantles the very mechanisms necessary for the development of character and resilience. The hedonist creates a perfectly temperature-controlled psychic environment, a greenhouse for the soul. And like a hothouse orchid, he becomes beautiful, perhaps, but exquisitely fragile, utterly incapable of surviving the first frost. Resilience is not a gift. It is a forged quantity. It is the psychological muscle tissue that is built through the voluntary confrontation with resistance. It is the strength you develop by doing things you don't want to do, by facing down your fears, by shouldering burdens you could have easily avoided. Every time you choose the difficult, meaningful path over the easy, pleasurable one, you are adding a layer of steel to your soul. You are stress testing your own being. The hedonist does the opposite. He actively avoids all stress, all difficulty, all pain. His life becomes a curated experience, a bubble-wrapped existence. He never learns to tolerate frustration, to delay gratification, or to endure hardship. He has no experience of his own capacity to withstand the onslaught of reality. And so, when the foundational catastrophe inevitably returns, as it must, when tragedy kicks in his door in the form of illness, betrayal, or death, what happens? He shatters. He disintegrates. He has no psychological musculature to bear the load. The pain is not just pain, it is a shocking, personal insult, a violation of the way things are supposed to be. He has spent his entire life lifting styrofoam weights, and now the universe has dropped a mountain of granite upon him. His collapse is total. The pathway to hell. And what emerges from that collapse? What is the psychological state of the shattered hedonist whose philosophy of life has been proven a lie? It is not quiet acceptance. It is a toxic brew of self-pity, confusion, and, most dangerously of all, resentment. The hedonist feels betrayed. He followed the rules of the culture. He pursued his bliss. He did everything he was told would make him happy. And still, tragedy found him. Still, the universe inflicted this unbearable pain upon him. It must be someone's fault. It must be the fault of a system that is rigged, a society that is corrupt, a world that is unjust, a God who is a tyrant. Do you see where this leads? The flight from the clean, impersonal suffering of the foundational catastrophe leads directly to the creation of the self-made, personalized hell of resentment. Hedonism is the gateway drug to nihilism. The failed pursuit of pleasure lays the perfect groundwork for a bitter war against being itself. The narcotized soul, once the anesthetic wears off, does not become a stoic. It becomes a shrieking accuser, demanding to know why the universe has failed to live up to its childish expectations. Thus, the strategy designed to avoid suffering ends up generating a new, more poisonous form of it. It not only leaves you weak and unprepared for the world, but it also provides you with a bitter, blame-filled narrative to explain your own weakness. It is a trap that not only ensures your destruction but convinces you that your destruction is everyone's fault but your own. It is the very opposite of responsibility. It is the abdication of the soul. Chapter 5, The Resentful Heart, Nihilism and the Seductive Call of Nothingness. We have journeyed through the wreckage of the hedonist's philosophy. We have seen how the desperate flight from pain, far from leading to liberation, culminates in a catastrophic collapse of the soul, leaving the individual weak, brittle, and utterly unprepared for the inevitable onslaught of being. But what crawls from that wreckage? When the bubble-wrapped palace of pleasure is shattered by the granite fist of reality, what sort of creature emerges from the ruins? One might hope for the emergence of a chastened stoic, an individual who, having seen the folly of their ways, now turns to face the world with newfound sobriety and strength. This is a rare and heroic transformation. The far more common, and far more dangerous, outcome is the curdling of the soul. The shattered hedonist does not find strength, he finds blame. The naive optimism does not transmute into mature resilience, it sours into a poisonous, bottomless bitterness. This is the genesis of the resentful heart. And it is the psychological furnace in which the darkest ideologies of the modern world have been forged. Resentment is the shadow that follows disappointed idealism. It is the spiritual posture of the individual who has been defeated by the burden of being and, lacking the character to hold themselves accountable, opts instead to hold being itself in contempt. From this festering emotional wound, a philosophical justification must be constructed, an intellectual superstructure to legitimize the spite. That justification is nihilism. And nihilism is not a brave, dispassionate acceptance of a meaningless universe. It is the ultimate revenge of the failed soul, a burning desire to pull all of creation down into the abyss. The anatomy of ressentiment, the poison of the impotent soul. To understand this pathology, we must first dissect the specific nature of the poison. We are not speaking of simple anger or righteous indignation. We are speaking of ressentiment, a concept diagnosed with terrifying precision by Friedrich Nietzsche. Anger, for Nietzsche, could be a clean and noble force, the explosive reaction of the strong to an injustice, a force that seeks to correct the world. Ressentiment, by contrast, is the secret, brooding, impotent hatred of the weak. It is a spiritual venom that the soul secretes when it is unable to act, a poison it brews in the cellar of the psyche and drinks over and over again, all while imagining it is poisoning its enemies. The man of ressentiment is defined by a constellation of toxic psychological traits. He possesses a burning sense of injury, a conviction that he has been wronged by an unjust world. Crucially, this sense of injury is wedded to an absolute inability to locate the source of the problem within himself. He is the eternal victim. His failures are never his own, they are the fault of a corrupt system, an oppressive hierarchy, an unfair God. He looks upon the success of others not as an inspiration or a standard to which he might aspire, but as a personal affront, a testament to the world's injustice. This is the very soul of Cain, the archetypal resentful man. Cain saw that his brother Abel's sacrifice was accepted where his own was not. Point 2 The structure of reality itself, symbolized by God, rendered a judgment upon the quality of his offering, and found it wanting. He was faced with a choice of profound metaphysical weight. He could have looked at his brother and thought, "My brother has understood something I have not. The fault lies in my own half-hearted, begrudging approach. I must humble myself, learn from his example, and elevate my own being. I must improve my sacrifice." That is the path of nobility, the path of redemption, the path that transforms the suffering of failure into the wisdom of character. But Cain chose the other path. The easier path. The path of ressentiment. He refused to locate the fault within himself. Instead, he located it in the standard of judgment itself. The very existence of Abel's goodness became an intolerable reminder of his own inadequacy. So, he did not seek to elevate himself to the good. He sought to eliminate the good from the world. This is the fundamental logic of the resentful heart. If the light makes me look bad, then I will extinguish the light. It is a declaration of war on virtue itself. Nihilism. The intellectual armor of spite. A poisonous emotional state like ressentiment cannot sustain itself in a vacuum. The conscious mind, even in its corruption, craves justification. It requires an intellectual framework, a philosophical rationalization to legitimize its bitterness and transform its pathetic whining into a seemingly profound critique. That rationalization is nihilism. The modern nihilist is not the brave Übermensch that Nietzsche prophesied might one day overcome him. He is not a courageous figure staring into the cosmic void with steely resolve. He is, almost without exception, the man of ressentiment who has put on a philosophical costume. Nihilism provides him with the perfect alibi for his own failure. It is the ultimate intellectual sour grapes argument. It is not that I have failed to find meaning, purpose, and success in life, the nihilist tells himself. It is that the game itself is corrupt, meaningless, and bankrupt. There is no such thing as meaning. Value is a spook. Truth is merely a function of power. Success is always a product of luck or oppression. Do you see the seductive genius of this posture? It transforms personal failure into intellectual superiority. The nihilist can look out upon the entire spectacle of human striving, the creation of art, the pursuit of scientific truth, the building of families, the establishment of just institutions, and sneer at it all from a position of supposed enlightenment. He mistakes his cynicism for wisdom. He is the perpetual critic, the deconstructionist, the man who can brilliantly demonstrate why every chair is poorly made but who has never once attempted to build a stool. He can tear down, but he cannot build, because building requires a faith in the value of the thing being built, a faith his resentful heart cannot possibly stomach. His primary tools are mockery, cynicism, and the unmasking critique. He seeks to expose the hidden motivations behind every noble act, to show that charity is merely vanity, love is merely lust, and heroism is merely a pathology. He does this not in a genuine search for truth, but in a desperate attempt to level the world, to tear down every hierarchy of value so that his own position at the bottom does not seem so unbearable. If nothing is truly valuable, then his own lack of value is no longer a personal tragedy. It is a universal condition. He seeks not to climb out of the abyss, but to convince everyone that the abyss is all there is. The seductive call of nothingness, revenge is meaning. Here we arrive at the final, terrifying destination of this pathology. What happens when a soul marinated in resentment and armored with nihilism seeks to act in the world? It does not simply sit in its corner, content in its own misery. No, the poison demands expression. The repressed energy of ressentiment must eventually explode. And when it does, it reveals the deepest, darkest secret of the nihilistic heart. The desire for destruction is, itself, a source of meaning. This is the ultimate satanic inversion. Having declared all positive values to be a fraud, the nihilist discovers a new, terrible, and intensely powerful value in the act of destruction itself. If you cannot create, you can at least destroy. The act of tearing down is a profound display of power over the thing being torn down. It is a final, triumphant no, shouted at the face of a reality that has rejected you. It is the ultimate act of revenge against being. This is the psychological state that produces the school shooter, the ideological terrorist, the revolutionary who seeks to burn the world to the ground and start again from year zero. Their manifestos are filled with the language of resentful nihilism. They see the world as a corrupt, hypocritical sham, and they see themselves as the sole agents of a terrible, cleansing truth. Their act of mass destruction is not, in their minds, an act of evil. It is an act of judgment. It is an unmasking. It is the ultimate performance art, designed to prove their central thesis, that life is a cruel joke and that nothing matters, by making it so for their victims. In the screams of the innocent, they finally hear a confirmation of their worldview. This is the seductive call of nothingness. It offers the ultimate consolation to the failed soul. It says, you may have been a loser in the game of life, but you can be a god in the game of death. You can have the final word. You can become an agent of the abyss, a servant of the void, and in that service, you will finally find your purpose. It is the temptation to find meaning not in shouldering the burden of being, but in becoming a force that adds to its weight, a force that seeks to make it so unbearable that it finally collapses under its own agony. It is the spirit of Cain, writ large upon the world stage, seeking not just to murder his brother, but to murder existence itself. And so we see the full, horrifying trajectory. The failure to bear the natural suffering of life leads to a pathological flight into pleasure. The inevitable failure of that flight leads to the spiritual sickness of resentment. And that sickness, when it metastasizes and clothes itself in philosophy, produces the intellectual cancer of nihilism, whose ultimate, unspoken goal is the murder of being. This is the most dangerous pathology we will discuss. It is the direct precursor to the great, ideological hells of the last century, and its spirit is alive and well today, whispering its seductive lies to any soul too weak, too bitter, and too cowardly to choose life. Chapter 6. Building Towers on Sand, the Catastrophic Hope of Utopian Ideologies. We have followed the dark logic of the defeated soul to its bitter end. We saw how the flight from being's tragedy leads first to the fragile, narcotic dream of hedonism. We saw how the inevitable shattering of that dream gives birth to the poisonous serpent of ressentiment. And we saw how that resentment, in order to justify itself, dons the intellectual armor of nihilism, whispering the seductive lie that because nothing is true, everything is permitted. One might think that this nihilistic abyss is the final destination. It is not. For the resentful heart, even in its declaration of universal meaninglessness, cannot abandon its own desperate craving for purpose. And so, it performs one final, terrible act of psychological alchemy. It takes its boundless rage, its hatred of the successful, its contempt for the structures of being, and it cloaks them in the language of compassion. It resurrects a new God from the corpse of the old one, the God of the perfectible future. It gives its nihilism a political program. This is the birth of the utopian ideology. It is the most sophisticated, most dangerous, and most catastrophically hopeful of all the pathologies of refusal. It is the grand-scale attempt to solve the problem of human suffering through social and political engineering. It is the promise to build heaven on earth. And it is the ideology that, without exception, paves the road to hell with its good intentions. These ideologies are not merely doomed to fail, they are metaphysically fraudulent from the first premise, and they lead, with the inexorable logic of a falling stone, directly to the concentration camp, the gulag, and the killing field. The metaphysical fraud, a war against reality. At its core, every utopian ideology is a declaration of war against the tragic constants of the human condition that we painstakingly mapped in Part 1 of this book. It is a profound act of metaphysical denial, a refusal to accept the terms and conditions of existence itself. First, it denies the foundational catastrophe. The utopian looks at the baseline reality of suffering, caused by our biological limitations, our finitude, and the indifferent harshness of nature, and declares it to be a technical problem, a political glitch. Suffering, in this view, is not intrinsic to being, it is an artificial imposition caused by a flawed system. Be it the system of private property, the patriarchy, the monarchy, or some other designated scapegoat, the ideology insists that if we could only overthrow this system, we could eliminate suffering itself. This is a lie of such breathtaking arrogance that it staggers the imagination. It is the architectural equivalent of promising to build a skyscraper that is immune to gravity. Second, it denies the reality of the serpent in the garden. The utopian, in his view of humanity as a collection of noble savages corrupted by external forces, has no coherent category for intrinsic malevolence. The spirit of Cain, the reality of ressentiment, the human capacity for conscious, chosen evil, all of this is explained away. The tyrant is not a tyrant because he has embraced the monster in his own heart, he is merely a product of a corrupting system. The criminal is not a criminal because he has made malevolent choices, he is a victim of social inequality. By externalizing all evil onto a system or a class, the utopian exonerates the individual from all moral responsibility. And in so doing, he renders himself pathologically naive, utterly blind to the darkness that lurks not only in his enemies, but more dangerously, in himself and his fellow revolutionaries. Finally, it denies the tyranny of the corpse. While not promising literal immortality, the utopian ideology performs a sleight of hand. It replaces the problem of individual, personal annihilation with the promise of collective, historical immortality. You, the individual, may die, but you will die as a martyr for a cause that will live forever. You will be subsumed into the glorious march of progress toward the perfect future state. Your individual, finite life is thus given meaning by its sacrifice to this abstract, collective, and eternal project. It is a clever trick, but it is a trick nonetheless, a way of distracting from the terrifying, concrete reality of your own personal death by dissolving you into a comforting, and ultimately imaginary, historical narrative. The inexorable logic of totalitarianism. Because the utopian ideology is at war with reality itself, it cannot be implemented by gentle persuasion. It must be imposed by force. The logic that unfolds from its fraudulent premises is as predictable as it is horrifying. Step 1. Identify the scapegoat. Since suffering is not natural but is caused by a flaw in the current order, the first task is to identify the class of people who are responsible for that flaw. They are the enemies of progress, the saboteurs of paradise, the class enemies, the bourgeoisie, the kulaks, the unbelievers, the counter-revolutionaries. This act creates a simple, Manichaean world of pure good, the revolutionaries and the oppressed, and pure evil, the designated scapegoat class. Step 2. Centralize power. To overthrow the old order and remake society from the ground up requires the concentration of immense, unprecedented power into the hands of a small vanguard of the ideologically pure, the party, the Central Committee, who alone understand the historical necessity of the moment. Individual rights, traditions, and due process are redefined as bourgeois obstacles to the coming utopia. Step 3. Suppress dissent. In a world where the path to paradise is clear, any disagreement or critique cannot be an honest difference of opinion. It must be an act of sabotage. It must be treason. Therefore, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of thought become not just luxuries, but active threats to the revolution. The dissenter is not merely wrong, he is an agent of the enemy, a carrier of the disease of the old world. He must be silenced. Step 4. The failure of paradise and the escalation of terror. Here we arrive at the crucial, bloody pivot. The new order is imposed, the scapegoats are eliminated, the power is centralized. And yet, paradise does not arrive. People are still greedy, anxious, and tribal. Crops still fail. The foundational catastrophe persists. The ideology now faces a choice. It can admit that its founding premises were wrong, that reality is more complex than its simplistic model allowed. Or, it can conclude that its failure is due to insufficient application of the theory. The problem was not the idea, but that the purge was incomplete. The revolution was not pure enough. There are still hidden enemies, wreckers, and saboteurs lurking within the population, even within the party itself. The ideology, being a closed and totalizing system, will always choose the second option. It cannot be wrong. Therefore, the terror must be escalated. The surveillance must become more pervasive. The definition of enemy must be expanded. The show trials and the purges must begin, turning the revolutionary state into a paranoid, self-devouring monster. This is the logic that led directly to Stalin's Great Terror and Mao's Cultural Revolution. The failure of the utopian promise does not discredit the ideology, it feeds it. Each failure becomes a justification for more power, more control, and more bloodshed. This is why the 20th century is a graveyard of utopias. The tens of millions slaughtered by the communists in the Soviet Union and China, the killing fields of Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, the scientifically precise genocide of the Nazis, these were not tragic accidents or betrayals of a noble idea. They were the perfect, inevitable, and logical consequences of the utopian premise. They are what happens when you decide that you can build a tower to heaven, and that any number of human skulls can serve as its foundation. The danger of catastrophic hope. We must therefore conclude that this form of hope, the grand, sweeping, ideological hope for a world without suffering, is the most dangerous force in human history. It is a catastrophic hope. It is a hope that, by promising the impossible, grants itself a license to commit any atrocity in the present. It is a hope that looks at the messy, tragic, beautiful complexity of the individual human soul and sees only a flawed raw material to be hammered into the shape of its abstract ideal. To reject this catastrophic hope is not to embrace despair. It is to embrace reality. It is to accept that there is no final solution to the human condition. There is no political program that will eliminate tragedy, no economic system that will abolish malevolence, no social revolution that will conquer death. The alternative to this fraudulent, totalitarian hope is not hopelessness. It is a different kind of hope altogether. It is a harder, more sober, and infinitely more profound hope. It is a hope that is not found in the grand redesign of society, but in the difficult, courageous, and redemptive transformation of the individual soul. It is the hope that you, as a sovereign individual, can learn to bear the unbearable burden of being with truth, courage, and nobility. It is the hope that by shouldering your own voluntary cross, you can transfigure your own suffering into meaning. And it is to the articulation of that difficult, authentic hope that we must now, having cleared away the rubble of these false idols, finally turn. Part 3. The Alchemical Process, a Phenomenology of the Noble Path. Chapter 7. The Voluntary Cross, Distinguishing Sacrifice from Victimhood. We have walked through fire. We have stared into the abyss of the foundational catastrophe, we have confronted the intelligent malevolence of the serpent, and we have stood paralyzed before the absolute authority of the tyrant corpse. Then, we waded through the intellectual and spiritual sewerage of the modern world's pathetic escape routes, the fragile dream of the hedonist, the poisonous resentment of the nihilist, and the blood-soaked promise of the utopian. If you have come this far, you may be forgiven for thinking that the only logical conclusion is a state of profound and unshakable despair. The game is rigged, the world is a tragic theater of malice and decay, and our attempts to flee from this reality only lead to the construction of more elaborate hells. What, then, is left? Everything. It is here, at the very point of maximum darkness, that the possibility of genuine light emerges. It is here that we pivot from diagnosis to prescription, from mapping the sickness to articulating the cure. The cure is not an escape. It is not a denial. It is a transformation of the poison into a tonic. It is a spiritual alchemy of the highest and most difficult order. And the formula for this alchemy is contained in the distinction between two fundamentally different ways of enduring the suffering that life entails. It is the distinction between the passive, resentful posture of the victim and the active, noble posture of the sacrificer. The entire project of a meaningful life hinges upon your ability to understand this distinction and to enact the terrifying, liberating choice it represents. The posture of the victim, crushed beneath an imposed load. The default state of the modern soul, as we have seen, is that of the victim. What defines this posture? The victim experiences suffering as an imposition. It is an external, alien force that descends upon them without their consent, violating the peace and happiness they believe to be their natural birthright. The narrative of the victim is organized around a single, whining question: why is this happening to me? The victim is a passive object in the story of their own life. They are acted upon by the world. The boss is unfair, the partner is ungrateful, society is oppressive, genetics are cruel, God is unjust. The locus of control is always external. Because the suffering is perceived as an unjust imposition, it can only be met with a predictable and poisonous cocktail of emotions: self-pity, confusion, and, as we explored, a deep and abiding resentment towards the perceived source of the injury, and ultimately, towards the structure of being itself. The burden of the victim is a dead weight. Because it is not chosen, because it is seen as something that should not be, it has no purpose. It is meaningless agony. It is a crushing load that weakens the back, twists the spine, and embitters the soul. The victim is defined by the weight they are forced to carry. They become synonymous with their suffering. Their identity is a catalogue of grievances, a litany of injustices. They are pinned to the ground by a cross they did not choose, and they curse the heavens for its weight. The alchemical act, the definition of noble sacrifice. Now, consider the alternative. The alternative is not a world without crosses. The alternative is not a world without burdens. Such a world is the fraudulent paradise of the utopians. The alternative is to choose your cross. This is the essence of noble sacrifice, and it is defined by this precise formulation: the voluntary acceptance of a necessary burden. Let us dissect this, for every word is load-bearing. First, the burden. The burdens are the inescapable realities we have already established, the tragic limitations of your own nature, the responsibilities of your unique station in life, the suffering of your loved ones, the confrontation with the malevolence in yourself and the world, the terrible weight of your own mortality. These are not optional. These are the non-negotiable parameters of your existence. You do not get to choose whether or not you have a burden. Your only choice is whether you will carry it. Second, the necessary. This is a crucial distinction. Noble sacrifice is not the masochistic pursuit of random suffering. It is not the pointless self-flagellation of the neurotic. It is the shouldering of a necessary burden. And what makes a burden necessary? Reality itself makes it necessary. It is the truth you know you have to speak, despite the social cost. It is the family responsibility you must uphold, when it would be easier to walk away. It is the personal flaw, your arrogance, your cowardice, your laziness, that you know you must confront and overcome. It is the duty that lies directly in your path. A necessary burden is the piece of the world's suffering that is uniquely yours to bear. You can identify it by the fact that you know, in the deepest part of your soul, that to shirk it would be to diminish yourself. Finally, and this is the ingredient that ignites the entire alchemical process, the voluntary acceptance. This is the core act of will. The victim is crushed by a fate that is imposed. The hero, the sacrificer, is the one who looks at the same fate, the same necessary burden, and says, "I will it." He confronts the necessary and makes it voluntary. He transforms an imposition into a choice. It is the act of turning to face the dragon that is blocking your path and deciding to confront it, rather than attempting to live a smaller life in the sliver of territory it has not yet scorched. It is the moment you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What must be done?" The phenomenology of transfiguration, from weight to anchor. This act of will is not a mere intellectual trick. It fundamentally, radically, and immediately alters the subjective experience of the suffering itself. The phenomenology of your existence is transfigured. A burden that is imposed upon you is a dead weight. It crushes you. It has no meaning. Its only quality is its agonizing heaviness. But the very same burden, when picked up voluntarily, ceases to be a mere weight. It becomes an anchor. It is still heavy. God, is it ever heavy? But its function changes. In the chaotic, meaningless storm of being, the anchor is the one thing that gives you stability. It is the point of contact with the bedrock of reality. It is the thing that stops you from being swept away by the meaningless currents of hedonism or the resentful tides of nihilism. The weight you choose to bear is the one thing that can hold you steady. Furthermore, this act transforms you from a passive object into an active subject. The victim is a pawn in a game played by cruel and arbitrary forces. But the moment you voluntarily accept your necessary burden, you become a player. You are no longer the one to whom things are done, you are the one who does. Your life ceases to be a story about what has happened to you, and it becomes a story about what you have chosen to do with what has happened to you. This is the reclamation of your own sovereignty. This is the birth of the hero within your own soul. The hero is not the one without fear or without suffering. The hero is the one who, despite fear and suffering, voluntarily moves toward the dragon. And in this transformation, something else emerges, something that the hedonist and the nihilist can never comprehend: meaning. Meaning is not a cosmic gift. It is not something you find as you might find a lost wallet. Meaning is something you forge. And it is forged in the crucible of this decision. The meaning of your life becomes inextricably linked to the burden you have chosen to pick up. The more difficult the necessary burden you voluntarily accept, the more profound the meaning that irradiates your existence. This is the answer to the tyranny of the corpse. It is the answer to the nihilist's abyss. The fact of your death makes the finite game of pleasure and status absurd. But it does not make the infinite game of voluntary sacrifice absurd. In fact, it is what makes it necessary. It is the very finitude of your life that gives your choice its terrible, beautiful, and ultimate significance. This is the great, central archetype of Western consciousness, symbolized by the cross. The cross is not a symbol of victimhood. It is not the story of a man crushed by an unjust fate. It is the ultimate symbol of the voluntary acceptance of the maximum possible degree of suffering in service of the highest possible good. It is the symbolic representation of the metaphysical truth that the path through hell, when walked voluntarily, is the path to heaven. You are not, perhaps, called to bear that ultimate cross. But you are, without question, called to bear your own. It is there, waiting for you. It is that which you are most afraid of. It is that which you know you must do. And the choice is simple. You can lie on the ground and be crushed by it as a victim. Or you can stand up, with your shoulders back, and pick it up and carry it as a sacrifice. And in that choice lies the difference between a life of bitter, resentful hell and a life of difficult, but meaningful, redemption. Chapter 8, The Micro-Crucifixion, Articulating the Smallest Necessary Burdens. So, you have accepted the principle. You have, at least in the abstract, entertained the proposition that meaning is to be found not in the flight from suffering, but in the voluntary acceptance of a necessary burden. You have nodded along to the grand, archetypal narrative of the hero, the sacrificer, the one who confronts the dragon of chaos and voluntarily shoulders the cross of being. And now you stand, inspired perhaps, but paralyzed. Because the sheer scale of that mythological drama seems to have no point of contact with the messy, trivial, and often humiliating reality of your own life. You think to yourself, where is my dragon? Where is my great, world-defining cross? You look out upon your life and see no epic evil to confront, no civilization to save. You see a messy bedroom, a tense relationship, a list of procrastinated tasks, and a profound sense of your own inadequacy. And in that gap between the grand narrative and your mundane reality, you are tempted to despair, to dismiss the entire enterprise as a beautiful but useless fantasy. This is a profound and dangerous error. You are looking for the dragon on the horizon when it is, in fact, coiled at your feet. You are waiting for a Herculean task to be assigned to you by the gods, when you have been ignoring the thousand smaller, necessary burdens that reality has already placed directly in your path. The path to bearing the greatest of crosses does not begin with an act of superhuman strength. It begins with the micro-crucifixion. It begins with the voluntary acceptance of the smallest necessary burden that you have been assiduously avoiding. The fallacy of the grand gesture and the tyranny of the unmade bed. The romantic, adolescent soul is obsessed with the fantasy of the grand gesture. It imagines that character is forged in a single, dramatic moment of decision, the moment one runs into the burning building, the moment one stands up to the tyrant in the public square. These moments are real, and they are important. But they are not the substance of character. They are its final exam. The substance of character is forged in the crucible of the mundane, in the endless, repetitive, and often boring succession of small choices that constitute a life. Before you have the right to critique the corruptions of the state, you must first ask yourself if you have rectified the tyrannies of your own household. Before you can presume to bring order to the world, you must first ask yourself if you have brought order to your own room. Look at your bedroom. No, I am being absolutely serious. Look at it. Is it a space of peace, order, and tranquil readiness? Or is it a chaotic mess, a physical manifestation of a cluttered and undisciplined mind? That room is the first and most immediate dominion over which you have been granted sovereignty. It is your kingdom in miniature. And if you allow that kingdom to descend into chaos, if you cannot be trusted with the governance of those few square meters, what in God's name makes you think you are prepared to take on any larger responsibility? To clean your room, to make your bed, to put your possessions in their proper place, these are not trivial acts of housekeeping. They are the first, fundamental acts of imposing benevolent, conscious order on the entropic chaos of being. It is a daily battle. You wake up, and the bed is unmade. A small pocket of chaos has reasserted itself. To make it is to perform a small, voluntary act of ordering. It is to say, for this small part of the world, for this part that is mine, chaos will not have the final word today. It is a micro-sacrifice. You sacrifice the 5 minutes of extra sloth. You sacrifice the impulse to leave it for later. And in return, you get to start your day having already won the first, small victory against the forces of dissolution. You are training yourself. You are demonstrating to the deepest part of your own psyche that you are the sort of person who can be trusted to take a small patch of chaos and make it habitable. How can you ever hope to make your family, your community, or your own soul habitable if you cannot first manage this? The terrible sort of truth and the conversation you are avoiding. Now, let us move from the physical to the interpersonal. Think for a moment. What is the truth you are currently refusing to speak? What is the necessary conversation that you are avoiding because you are terrified of the consequences? Perhaps it is with your romantic partner. There is an issue between you, a serpent of resentment or deceit coiled in the space between your beds. You both know it is there. You can feel its cold presence in your silences. And to speak of it, to articulate it, would be to risk conflict. It would risk tears, anger, the shattering of the fragile, false peace you have constructed. And so you avoid it. You tell yourself it is for the sake of kindness, for the sake of not hurting their feelings. But that is a lie you tell yourself to mask your own cowardice. The truth you are avoiding is not a monster that will destroy you. The unspoken truth is the monster that is already destroying you, slowly, from the inside out. It is the cancer that metastasizes in the silence. To have that conversation is a micro-crucifixion. You must sacrifice your desire for comfort. You must sacrifice your terror of conflict. You must be willing to endure the short-term agony of a difficult confrontation for the long-term possibility of a relationship founded on the bedrock of truth, rather than the shifting sands of mutual deceit. The articulate, truthful word is a sword. And a sword is a dangerous thing. It can wound, but it can also cut. It can cut away the dead wood, the gangrenous tissue, the cancerous lies. It can separate what is real from what is illusion. To refuse to wield this sword, to leave it rusting in its scabbard out of fear, is to allow the rot to consume everything. Your refusal to speak is not a kindness. It is a sentence of slow, agonizing death upon the integrity of your relationship and upon your own soul. Picking up that sword, speaking that necessary truth, is a voluntary acceptance of a necessary burden. It is an act of profound and terrifying love. Weaving the fabric of being, the promise you made to yourself. Finally, let us look at the most intimate domain of all, your relationship with yourself. What promise have you made to your future self that you are currently in the process of betraying? You told yourself you would start exercising. You told yourself you would stop drinking so much. You told yourself you would work on your novel for an hour every day. You made a pact with your own future. And now, the moment of decision arrives. You are tired. You are tempted. The easy path of indulgence calls to you. The promise you made seems abstract and distant, while the pleasure of breaking it is immediate and concrete. To keep that promise is a micro-crucifixion. It is the sacrifice of the immediate, impulsive, lower-order desire of the present self on the altar of the well-being of the future self. It is an act of profound self-respect. It is the recognition that your word, even when given only to yourself, is a sacred bond. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you teach your psyche that your words are meaningless. You disintegrate your own integrity. You become unreliable, not just to others, but to the one person you can never escape. You create a tyrant and a slave within your own soul, where the impulsive, present-tense slave perpetually betrays the wise, long-term tyrant. But every time you keep that promise, especially when it is difficult, you do the opposite. You weave the fabric of your character into something strong and reliable. You prove to yourself that you are a person whose word has weight. You become your own most trusted ally. You are integrating yourself across time, becoming a unified and powerful force. You are demonstrating that you can be trusted. And if you cannot be trusted by yourself, you cannot be trusted by anyone. So, do not despair because you cannot see the mythological dragon. Your life is teeming with them. They are small, but they are legion. They are in the chaos of your room, in the silence of your relationships, and in the weakness of your own resolve. The path of noble sacrifice is not a grand, singular event. It is a daily, hourly practice. It is the constant, repetitive choice to confront these small, necessary burdens with voluntary, courageous action. This is how you build a soul that is strong enough to bear the great crosses when they inevitably arrive. This is how you earn the right to confront the larger dragons that plague the world. You start here. You start now. With the smallest, most obvious thing that you know you need to do. Pick up that tiny cross. It is heavier than you think. And it is the only way forward. Chapter 9, The Alchemy of Agony, How Assumed Responsibility Transforms Suffering into Meaning. We have arrived at the fiery heart of the matter. We have articulated the necessity of voluntarily accepting your necessary burden. We have made the case that this is the only path that leads away from the hells of hedonism, resentment, and utopian delusion. But this proposition may still feel like an abstraction, a piece of Stoic philosophy that is admirable in theory but impossible in practice. You may be asking yourself, how? How does the mere act of choosing my suffering possibly change its nature? Pain is pain. A crushing weight is a crushing weight. What is this alchemy but a semantic trick, a desperate mind game played against the unblinking brutality of the cosmos? This is a fair and intelligent question, and it deserves a precise and phenomenologically grounded answer. We are not talking about a trick of the mind. We are talking about a fundamental reorientation of the soul that radiates outward, transforming the very texture and meaning of lived experience. The change is not in the external facts of your suffering, but in the internal posture you adopt toward those facts. And that change in posture changes everything. The formula is this, and it is the most important equation you will ever learn: suffering plus responsibility equals meaning. Let us now place this alchemical formula under the microscope. We will dissect the process by which the addition of the catalyst, voluntary responsibility, transmutes the base metal of meaningless agony into the imperishable gold of genuine purpose. The phenomenology of dead weight. Suffering as a prison. First, we must vividly recall the nature of unchosen suffering, the posture of the victim. What does this state feel like? It is the experience of being an object. You are a thing to which bad things happen. You are a ship without a rudder or a captain, tossed about on a stormy sea. The winds of fate, the waves of tragedy, the currents of social pressure, all act upon you, and you are powerless to resist. Your life is a sequence of reactions to external stimuli. The locus of causality is always outside of yourself. This state is characterized by a particular temporal distortion. You are trapped in a prison constructed from the past and the present. Your mind cycles endlessly through the grievances of the past, replaying every injury, polishing every resentment until it glows with a dull, poisonous light. If only this hadn't happened, why did they do that to me? This is the circular, infernal logic of the victim's mind. There is no future, only an eternal, suffering present in a past that is a catalogue of wounds. The suffering itself feels like a dead weight. It is an alien mass that has been placed upon you. It has no purpose and serves no function other than to crush you. It is pure, inert, agonizing pressure. It is the experience of Sisyphus, but without the defiant spirit, a man crushed beneath a rock he does not understand, for a crime he does not believe he committed. This is the hell of meaninglessness. It is not just that you are in pain, it is that your pain signifies nothing. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The igniting spark, the volitional act. Now, into this closed, deterministic, and hellish system, we introduce the catalyst. We introduce the act of will. The transformation does not begin when the suffering lessens. It does not begin when the world changes. It begins with a decision. It is a decision that takes place in the absolute citadel of your consciousness, the one place that the world cannot touch. It is the decision to say, this suffering, this burden, this cross, it is mine. I do not know if I can bear it. I do not know if I am strong enough. But I will no longer act as if it does not belong to me. I will pick it up and carry it as if it were my own. This is the moment of true spiritual revolution. It is a terrifying moment, because in it, you are relinquishing all of your excuses. You are sacrificing your victimhood. You are letting go of the grim, perverse comfort of being able to blame the world for your misery. You are accepting responsibility not for the existence of your hardship, but for your response to it. The moment this decision is made, a subtle but profound shift occurs. You cease to be an object and you become a subject. You cease to be the passive effect and you become an active cause. You have introduced a new, non-deterministic variable into the equation of your life, your own conscious, directed will. This is the igniting spark. This is the plus responsibility in our alchemical formula. The metamorphosis of experience, a new heaven and a new earth. What happens next is the alchemy itself. The external facts may not have changed at all. The disease is still present. The difficult relationship is still difficult. The past is still immutable. But your subjective experience of these facts undergoes a radical metamorphosis. First, the dead weight becomes an anchor. The burden is still heavy. Let us not delude ourselves about that. The weight may be exactly the same, but its function is now completely different. A dead weight is a meaningless thing that crushes you. An anchor is a meaningful thing that grounds you. In the chaotic, swirling storm of life, the burden you have chosen to carry becomes the one point of stability. While others are swept away by the trivial currents of fashion, pleasure, and ideology, you have something solid to hold on to. It is your task. It is your purpose. Its very heaviness is what keeps you from being washed away. Second, the prison becomes an arena. The world, which previously felt like a confining space where bad things happen to you, is transformed. It becomes an arena for moral action. The obstacles are no longer just arbitrary impediments, they become challenges. They become the necessary resistance against which your character can be forged. The difficult person you must deal with is no longer just a source of torment, they are a dragon that gives you the opportunity to practice courage, patience, and strategic speech. The financial hardship is no longer just a deprivation, it is a landscape that demands the development of your ingenuity, discipline, and resolve. The world ceases to be a horror show you are forced to watch and becomes a heroic story in which you are the protagonist. Third, time itself is redeemed. The victim is trapped in the resentful past. The hedonist is trapped in the impulsive present. But the man who shoulders his burden is the only one who can create a meaningful future. Your goal is no longer the impossible and childish desire to be happy. Your goal becomes something concrete, difficult, and noble. I will carry this burden properly. I will confront this dragon with courage. I will see this responsibility through to the end. This goal, this purpose, projects a beam of light into the future, and that beam organizes the present. Every action you take in the present is now judged against that future goal. Does this action help me carry my burden? Or does it hinder me? This is how you escape the tyranny of momentary impulse. You sacrifice the lesser good of the present for the greater good of the future. You are building something. You are going somewhere. You have a destination, and that destination gives your journey a narrative, a structure, and a meaning. The final product, a soul forged in fire. And what is the final product of this alchemical process? It is you. Or rather, it is the person you become through this struggle. Your identity ceases to be defined by your grievances. You are no longer the person to whom these bad things happened. You become the person who is voluntarily contending with these specific challenges. Your character is not something you have, but something you are continually forging in the furnace of your chosen struggle. The act of confronting what you must confront literally creates you. You become stronger, more resilient, more competent. You discover depths of courage and resolve within yourself that you never knew existed, because they didn't exist until they were called forth by the demands of the task you set for yourself. This is the ultimate answer to the abyss. Suffering is the universal baseline, the lead that we are all given. It is a given. But meaning is the gold, and it must be manufactured. Responsibility is the philosopher's stone, the catalyst that makes the transformation possible. The nihilist looks at the lead of suffering and declares the entire universe to be a worthless, leaden thing. The hedonist tries to paint the lead yellow and pretend it is gold. The utopian tries to legislate the lead out of existence. Only the sacrificer, the hero, has the courage and the wisdom to take up the ugly, heavy, common lead of his own suffering, and through the fiery, painful, and voluntary process of taking responsibility for it, to forge it, moment by moment, day by day, into a life of solid gold. That is the alchemy of agony. And it is the only path to a life that can justify its own immense and terrible burden. Chapter 10, The Eye of the Hurricane, Finding Habitable Order in the Center of Your Chosen Chaos. We have journeyed to the depths and articulated the great, alchemical secret at the heart of being, that suffering, when confronted with voluntary responsibility, can be transfigured into meaning. We have laid out the practical, daily, and mundane work of the micro-crucifixion, the path by which this transformation is enacted. And so, a final question presents itself. What is the result? What manner of being is produced by this terrifying and heroic process? What does it feel like to be the individual who has successfully shouldered their cross, who has integrated the dark truths of existence and still refuses to surrender? The state that emerges is not happiness in any trivial sense of the word. It is not the placid contentment of the well-fed animal. It is not a permanent state of positive emotion. To achieve such a state would be neither possible nor desirable. No, the state that is achieved is something far more profound, stable, and powerful. It is the paradoxical condition of the eye of the hurricane. It is a state of deep, abiding calm that exists not in the absence of chaos, but precisely at the heart of it. It is a habitable order carved directly from the howling maelstrom of life itself, a centered power anchored by the very weight that once threatened to crush it. The nature of the new calm, beyond the anxiety/happiness dichotomy. The modern conception of mental health is predicated on a false dichotomy. On one side, there is anxiety, turmoil, and pain, which are seen as pathological. On the other, there is happiness, calm, and pleasure, which are seen as healthy. The entire therapeutic enterprise is often geared toward moving from the former to the latter, as if one were fleeing a diseased country for a land of perpetual sunshine. This is a profound misunderstanding of the geography of the soul. The man in the eye of the hurricane has transcended this childish dichotomy. His calm is not the opposite of the storm. It is a condition made possible by the storm. He is not happy because the winds are not blowing. The winds are blowing with unimaginable force. The chaos of the world, the malevolence of men, the tragedy of mortality, all of it is still there, raging at the periphery. His calm comes from the fact that he has stopped running from the storm and has instead found its center. What does this feel like? It is the cessation of the frantic inner monologue of the victim. The constant, whining question, "Why is this happening to me?" has been silenced, replaced by the quiet, focused question, "What must be done next?" The terror of the unknown does not disappear, but it is transmuted. The anxiety of the man who feels unprepared for a vague and looming threat is replaced by the focused, clean fear of the man who is walking deliberately toward a known challenge. It is the difference between the dread of the soldier hiding in a trench, waiting for an artillery shell to land, and the focused alertness of the soldier who has been given a mission and is advancing on an objective. The first is a state of passive, disintegrating terror. The second is a state of active, integrating courage. This is not a state of emotional numbness. The individual in the eye of the hurricane feels pain, grief, and disappointment, perhaps more acutely than the narcotized soul who has blunted his senses. But these emotions no longer have the power to capsize him. They are weather fronts that move through his reality, but they do not alter his core. He has found a place within himself that is deeper than the waves of momentary emotion. He is anchored. The gravity of purpose, how the anchor works. What is this anchor? It is the immense psychological and spiritual gravity generated by his chosen burden. We have said that the assumed responsibility becomes an anchor, but we must understand how this works in practice. A life without a central, organizing purpose is a life at the mercy of every trivial force. You are buffeted by the opinions of others, by the whims of your own appetites, by the anxieties of the daily news cycle. Your energy is dissipated in 1,000 different directions. You are psychologically light, easily thrown about. But the man who has accepted his noble sacrifice has a center of gravity. His purpose, to carry his burden properly, becomes the sun around which the planets of his life revolve. This has a profound simplifying and organizing effect on his entire existence. Every decision, every action, every allocation of time and resources is now filtered through a single, clarifying question. Does this serve my purpose? Does this help me carry the load, or does it add to it unnecessarily? Does this align with the person I am trying to become, or is it a betrayal of that aim? This gives him an almost shocking degree of focus. He can say no to the 1,000 trivialities that clamor for his attention, not out of ascetic denial, but because they are irrelevant to his central mission. He is no longer interested in the frantic pursuit of pleasure because it is a distraction from the deeper satisfaction of his duty. He is no longer tormented by the successes of others because their path is not his. He is too busy walking his own. This focused energy is power. It is the power of a river that has been channeled into a narrow, deep gorge. It cuts through obstacles. It is the power of the laser over the floodlight. The weight of his responsibility does not crush him, it focuses him into a tool of formidable and directed competence. A new relationship with chaos, the dragon as partner. Perhaps the most profound transformation is the individual's relationship to chaos itself. The uninitiated soul sees chaos, the unexpected, the tragic, the disorderly, as the enemy. It is the thing that disrupts the plan, that ruins the happiness. The goal is to eliminate chaos, to create a life of perfect, predictable, walled-in order. The man in the eye of the hurricane knows this is a fool's errand. He comes to understand a much deeper truth. Chaos is not the enemy of meaning, it is its necessary precondition. Chaos is the raw material from which all habitable order must be carved. It is the dragon that hoards the gold. Without the dragon, there is no hero and no treasure. Without the block of uncarved marble, there can be no statue. This leads to a strange and paradoxical gratitude for the struggle. The obstacles are no longer seen as mere impediments. They are understood to be the very things that give the journey its meaning and the individual his strength. The hurricane is what defines the eye. Without the storm, the calm is meaningless. It is just empty space. The individual now understands that his strength, his character, his very soul, have been forged in the fires of the adversity he has chosen to confront. He no longer prays for an easy life. He prays to be a stronger man. He does not ask for a lighter load. He asks for a broader back. His fundamental orientation to the world shifts from "this shouldn't be happening" to "this is what is, and my task is to contend with it honorably." The load-bearing man, the still point in a turning world. How does such a person appear to others? He becomes a source of stability in a crisis. When others are panicking, when the structures of everyday life begin to tremble and fall, he remains centered. Not because he is emotionless or detached, but because the current chaos is simply another manifestation of the storm he has already learned to navigate. His fundamental premises are not shaken, because his worldview is already built upon the bedrock of tragedy and the necessity of courage. He becomes reliable. His word has weight because it is backed by a history of kept promises to himself and others. People are drawn to him, not because of a flashy charisma, but because of a quiet, unshakable solidity. He becomes, in the most profound sense, a load-bearing member of his family, his community, and his culture. He is the person who can be counted on when things fall apart, precisely because he has built his entire psychic structure on the premise that things do fall apart. He is the person who runs toward the burning building, not because he is reckless, but because confronting necessary problems is his fundamental mode of being. This is the ultimate result of the alchemical process. It is the transformation of a frightened, resentful, and fragile victim into a pillar of strength. It is not a final destination, not a static paradise. The storm still rages. The eye can shrink or expand. The work is never, ever done. But the peace that is found there, the peace not of the graveyard, but of the skilled navigator on a treacherous sea, the peace not of ignorance, but of courage in the face of full knowledge, is the only peace worth having. It is the peace that passeth all understanding. And it is available to anyone with the courage to stop running from a storm and turn to face it, to pick up their own cross, and to find the calm, habitable, and meaningful order that lies, waiting, in its very eye. Part 4. The Cosmological Significance of the Act. Chapter 11. Forging the World from the Dragon's Corpse, Sacrifice as the Engine of Creation. We have followed the path of the individual soul from the depths of hell to a state of centered, paradoxical peace. We have seen how the voluntary acceptance of a necessary burden, the act of noble sacrifice, can transform the leaden agony of existence into the gold of meaning, creating a habitable order in the eye of the life's hurricane. A skeptic might, at this point, concede the psychological utility of such a strategy. Fine, he might say, you have articulated a robust coping mechanism, a powerful mental model for generating resilience and purpose. It is a useful fiction, a noble lie you tell yourself to make the terror of existence bearable. If that were all this was, it would still be a secret of immense value. But it is not. The claim we are making is far more profound, far more audacious, and far more terrifyingly true. The process of transforming chaos into order through voluntary, courageous confrontation is not merely a psychological trick. It is the fundamental, archetypal pattern of creation itself. It is the engine that drives the cosmos. The individual who engages in noble sacrifice is not just saving his own soul. He is participating in the ongoing, cosmogonic act of creating the world. He is a junior partner with God. To understand this, we must zoom out. We must move from the scale of the individual life to the scale of myth, to the deepest stories our species has ever told itself to explain the nature of reality. For these ancient myths are not primitive, pre-scientific attempts to explain thunderstorms and sunsets. They are staggeringly sophisticated psychological and metaphysical maps, charts of the deep structure of being, encoded in narrative form. And when you look at the oldest and most profound of these myths, you find the same, terrifying, and heroic story, told over and over again. The Chaoskampf, confronting the primordial dragon. This archetypal story has a name among scholars, the Chaoskampf, the struggle against chaos. 1. It is the story of a divine hero who voluntarily confronts a monstrous, primordial embodiment of chaos, very often a serpent or a dragon, and, by defeating it, establishes the conditions for habitable order. We see this pattern everywhere. We see it in the Norse myth of Thor battling the world serpent Jormungandr. We see it in the Greek myth of Apollo slaying the serpent Python at Delphi to establish his sacred oracle. We see it in the Hebrew story of God's mastery over the great sea monster, the Leviathan. But nowhere is this cosmogonic drama laid out with more brutal clarity and psychological depth than in the great Mesopotamian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. This is one of the oldest stories we possess, and it contains the secret of the world. The story begins not with a void, but with a formless, watery chaos, a mixture of the fresh water, Apsu, the masculine principle, and the salt water, Tiamat, the feminine principle. 2. Tiamat is the primordial dragon, the great mother of everything. 3. But she is the mother in her terrible aspect, undifferentiated, all-encompassing, unconscious, and monstrously fertile. She is the raw potential of being itself, which is both the source of all things and a state of horrifying, formless chaos. She is the foundational catastrophe in its purest, mythological form. From this union, the younger gods emerge. They are more individuated, more conscious. And they are noisy. Their activity disturbs the slumbering chaos of their parents. The elder gods, representing a stagnant and decadent order, decide to destroy their offspring to restore the silent peace of non-being. But it is Tiamat who truly rises in monstrous rage. She gives birth to a host of terrifying monsters, vipers, dragons, and scorpion men, and prepares to devour her own children, to pull the fledgling structure of reality back into the undifferentiated abyss from which it came. The gods are paralyzed with terror. They are the established order, but they are too weak, too cowardly, too decadent to face the rising tide of chaos. They are the society that refuses to confront its problems. The rise of the hero and the great bargain. Then, a new god emerges, the young, powerful Marduk. He is different. The text tells us he has eyes all around his head, a perfect symbol for a heightened, 360-degree state of consciousness. He sees everything. And where the other gods cower, he volunteers. He agrees to confront the great dragon Tiamat to be their champion. This is the act of noble sacrifice. It is the voluntary confrontation with the terrifying unknown, with the very source of chaos and destruction that everyone else is too afraid to face. But Marduk does not do this for nothing. He makes a bargain. He says to the paralyzed council of the elder gods, "If I am to be your champion and defeat this monster, then you must grant me sovereignty. You must make me king." This is a point of breathtaking psychological insight. The right to rule, the establishment of a proper and authoritative hierarchy, is not something that is inherited or stolen. It is earned. It is the reward granted to the individual or the principle that is willing to voluntarily confront the worst that chaos has to offer. Competence in the face of the unknown is the ultimate justification for authority. The gods agree. And so Marduk, armed with the winds, a net, and the power of his ordering speech, goes forth to meet the dragon. Point 4. Creation from the corpse of chaos. The battle is cataclysmic. Tiamat opens her mouth to devour him, and Marduk drives the evil winds into her belly, distending her, and then slays her with an arrow. Point 5. He has conquered chaos. But here is the secret that lies at the heart of all creation. He does not annihilate her. He does not erase her. He begins the work of world building with her corpse. He splits her slain body in two. With one half, he creates the arch of the heavens. With the other, he lays out the foundations of the earth. He sets the stars in their courses, he establishes the rhythm of the seasons, he measures out the world. He then creates humanity from the blood of Tiamat's monstrous second-in-command to serve the gods and tend the earth. The profound, world-altering truth is this: habitable order is not created from nothing. It is carved, with courage and sacrifice, from the body of the chaos that preceded it. Chaos is not merely the enemy, it is the raw, necessary material of being. The goal is not to destroy the dragon, but to dismember it and use its constituent parts to build something new, something useful, something habitable. The fractal pattern, you as world creator. Now, you must understand. This is not just an old story. This is a map of the process you engage in every single day. The pattern is fractal. It repeats at every level of reality. The chaos that confronts you in your life, your messy bedroom, your disordered finances, your unarticulated resentment toward a family member, your unmastered addictions, that is your personal Tiamat. It is a small-scale manifestation of the primordial, formless abyss. It is a pocket of reality that has not yet been given habitable, conscious form. It is the part of your world that remains in its monstrous, pre-cosmic state. Every time you choose to avoid that chaos, to leave the room a mess, to let the resentment fester in silence, to surrender to the addiction, you are cowering like the elder gods. You are allowing the dragon to grow, to birth its monstrous offspring, and to slowly devour the ordered territory of your life. But when you decide to confront it, when you, like Marduk, voluntarily turn to face the chaos, you are enacting the cosmogonic myth in miniature. When you decide to finally clean your room, you are slaying a small dragon of disorder. But you are not just destroying the mess. You are taking the chaotic elements, the clothes, the books, the dust, and you are ordering them. You are dismembering the small chaos and using its parts to construct a new reality, a bedroom that is a habitable, ordered, peaceful space. You have created a tiny cosmos out of a tiny chaos. When you finally decide to have that necessary, terrifying conversation with your partner, you are confronting the dragon of unspoken truth. And in the fiery, painful battle of that conversation, you slay the monster of deceit. And with its corpse, you have the opportunity to build a new world, a relationship founded not on a fragile, false peace, but on the bedrock of articulated, integrated truth. This is the cosmological significance of your every moral act. Every time you choose responsibility over victimhood, truth over falsehood, courage over cowardice, you are pushing back the boundaries of chaos. You are expanding the domain of habitable order, not just in your own life, but in the world itself. You are a neuron in the consciousness of being, and your every act of noble sacrifice is an act of creation. It is not a metaphor. It is the deepest reality. You are standing on the eternal frontier between the dragon and the city, and your every choice either feeds the dragon or expands the walls of the city. This is the ultimate answer to nihilism. Your life is not meaningless. Your suffering is not for nothing. Your choices are of ultimate, cosmic significance. Because the world is not a finished product. It is a work in progress. It is a constant, ongoing battle between the forces of chaos that seek to pull it back into the abyss, and the divine, ordering logos that seeks to redeem it. And you, in the courageous bearing of your own particular, necessary cross, are a soldier in that war. You are a world creator. And that is a destiny of such profound and terrible significance that it should be enough to wake you from any slumber and inspire you to any sacrifice. Chapter 12, The Sovereign Individual as the Cornerstone of Being. We have come to the end of our journey. We began in the deepest strata of existence, staring without flinching into the tripartite abyss of indifferent suffering, conscious malevolence, and absolute mortality. We navigated the pathetic, cowardly, and ultimately hellish escape routes conceived by the modern spirit, the fragile bubble of the hedonist, the poisonous cellar of the resentful nihilist, and the blood-soaked, sand-founded tower of the utopian ideologue. From the wreckage of those failures, we uncovered the one, true, alchemical path, the transformation of suffering into meaning through the voluntary acceptance of necessary burdens. We saw how this noble sacrifice is not merely a psychological strategy, but a participation in the eternal, cosmic act of creation itself, the carving of habitable order from the corpse of the dragon of chaos. And so, we are left with a final question. What is the product of this entire, agonizing, heroic process? What do we call the individual who has walked this path, who has integrated the shadow, who has accepted the tragic conditions of being, and who has nonetheless committed themselves to the practice of voluntary sacrifice? We call them the sovereign individual. This sovereignty is not a matter of political status or economic independence. That is a shallow, external reading. It is a sovereignty of the soul. The sovereign individual is the man or woman who has ceased to be a slave to their appetites, a slave to their fear, a slave to their resentment, a slave to the crowd, and, most importantly, a slave to the tyrant. They have wrested the locus of control for their own being from the chaotic whims of the external world and placed it firmly within the citadel of their own conscious, disciplined will. This individual, and this individual alone, is the ultimate antidote to the twin pathologies that eternally threaten to destroy the world. They are the bulwark against both chaos and tyranny. They are the cornerstone upon which any reality worth inhabiting must be built. The bulwark against chaos. Chaos, the primordial dragon, is the default state of nature. It is the entropy that pulls at the seams of every ordered system, the ignorance that surrounds our small island of knowledge, the unforeseen tragedy that waits to capsize our lives. Most people live in profound and willful ignorance of this fact. Their lives are a frantic attempt to maintain a fragile, artificial order, and when the inevitable storm hits, they are shattered. They panic. They lie. They betray. They disintegrate, adding their own screaming terror to the general chaos. The sovereign individual is different. They do not live in denial of chaos. Their entire mode of being is predicated on its existence. They have trained themselves, through the daily practice of the micro-crucifixion, to face down small pockets of disorder voluntarily. They have made a habit of confronting the unknown. As a result, when the great waves of chaos strike, they are not washed away. They are the one person in the room who does not lose their head. Because their meaning is derived from the shouldering of responsibility, the presence of a problem does not break them, it gives them purpose. While others are fleeing the burning building, they are the ones who instinctively assess the situation and run inside. While others are paralyzed by the uncertainty of a crisis, they are the ones who begin to articulate a plan, to speak the ordering words that can pull a group together. They have built their house upon the rock of tragic knowledge, and so when the floods come, their house stands. In their personal lives, they are the force that holds a family together through hardship. In their communities, they are the ones who can be relied upon to speak the truth when it is unpopular, to do the difficult work when no one else will. They do not do this because they are seeking applause or reward. They do it because it is their nature. They have so thoroughly integrated the process of confronting chaos and turning it into habitable order that it has become as instinctual as breathing. They are antibodies to social hysteria, firewalls against panic, and generators of competence in the face of crisis. They are the living embodiment of the logos, the ordering principle, and their very presence pushes back the tide of dissolution. The antidote to tyranny. If chaos is one of the two great beasts that stalk humanity, the other is its shadow twin, pathological order, which is tyranny. Tyranny is the imposition of a rigid, simplistic, and ideological grid onto the complex, breathing reality of the human spirit. And a tyrant can only rule over a population of slaves. His power depends entirely on the moral and spiritual weakness of his subjects. The tyrant thrives on the pathologies we have dissected. He meets a populace of hedonists, distracted by bread and circuses, willing to trade their freedom for comfort and security. He meets a population of victims, whom he can promise to rescue from their designated oppressors. He meets a population seething with resentment, whose envy and bitterness he can channel toward a scapegoat. He meets a population of nihilists, who do not believe in any transcendent truth or value, and who are therefore susceptible to the brutal truth of his power. The sovereign individual is immune to this poison. They are the tyrant's worst nightmare. The tyrant's primary weapon is the lie. But the sovereign individual has oriented their life around the voluntary speaking of truth, no matter how difficult. They will not repeat the party slogan if they know it to be false. They will not pretend that the emperor is wearing clothes. The tyrant's second weapon is fear, particularly the fear of death. But the sovereign individual has already confronted the tyranny of the corpse. They have integrated the knowledge of their own finitude and found a meaning that transcends it. While they do not seek death, they do not fear it more than they fear the spiritual death of living a lie. They will not trade their soul for a few more years of compromised existence. The tyrant offers a counterfeit meaning in service to the state. But the sovereign individual generates their own meaning from the bottom up, through their shouldering of personal, familial, and community responsibility. Their loyalty is not to an abstract ideology, but to the concrete realities of the people they have chosen to serve and the truths they have chosen to embody. A society composed of a critical mass of such individuals is ungovernable by any tyrant. It is the ultimate inoculation against the totalitarian impulse. 1,000 lies die when they meet one person willing to tell the truth. A totalitarian structure collapses when enough people refuse to be afraid. The sovereign individual is the one who will say no. And that no, spoken from a place of deep, earned, and courageous integrity, is the word that shatters empires. The cornerstone of a world. We arrive, then, at the final, most audacious claim. The sovereign individual is not merely a strong and admirable person. They are not just a good citizen. They are the cornerstone of being itself. Reality, as we have conceived of it, is not a static, finished thing. It is a dynamic process, a constant, unfolding drama. It is a perpetual state of becoming, eternally caught between the Scylla of chaotic dissolution and the Charybdis of tyrannical, deadening order. Being requires a constant act of redemption, a continuous creation to justify its own continuation. And what is the agent of that redemption? It is the conscious, courageous, truth-speaking individual. Culture is not an abstract force that descends from on high. It is the emergent property of the aggregated moral choices of sovereign individuals. A culture of life, A culture that is strong, adaptable, and true is one that is populated by men and women who are willing to bear their burdens voluntarily. A decadent, dying culture is one that is populated by victims, hedonists, and nihilists. You are not a splinter of wood tossed on the waves of history. You are a potential cornerstone for the reality of tomorrow. Every time you choose the easy path over the necessary one, you weaken the structure of the world. Every lie you tell, every responsibility you shirk, every act of cowardice, it is a small tremor that undermines the foundation of your family, your community, and the culture itself. It is a vote for chaos. It is a vote for tyranny. But every time you choose to confront what you must confront, every time you speak the truth when a lie would be easier, every time you pick up the burden you know to be yours, you are engaging in the sacred work of shoring up the walls of being. You are laying a stone, solid and true. You are doing your part in the eternal, cosmic project of redeeming the world from its own worst impulses. This is the ultimate significance of your life. You are poised between heaven and hell, and your choices, your sacrifices, tilt the balance. The burden is immense, almost too great to contemplate. The path is one of perpetual, unceasing effort. The reward is not happiness. The reward is not comfort. The reward is the profound, soul-fortifying knowledge that your life, in all its tragic, painful, and fleeting glory, has served as a load-bearing pillar in the cathedral of being. That you were a worthy anchor. That you stood in the eye of the hurricane and held your ground. That you saw the dragon and you did not look away. Conclusion, beyond the burden, to bear the light. We began our journey in the dark. We descended, together, into the cold, hard bedrock of reality, uncovering the triple truth of existence, that life is suffering, that the human heart contains a terrifying capacity for malice, and that the specter of our own annihilation haunts our every moment. We did not do this out of some morbid curiosity. We did this because truth, no matter how terrible, is the only ground upon which a life of any substance can be built. We have seen the falsehood of the easy paths. We have witnessed the inevitable collapse of the soul that seeks only pleasure, the toxic and self-devouring nature of the heart that chooses resentment, and the road to mass graves paved by the catastrophic hope of utopia. These are the paths of children, of cowards, and of fools. They are the refusal of the great adventure that life offers. And the adventure is this: the burden of being is inescapable, but it is not a curse. It is the raw material of your life, the iron ore from which a sword or a plowshare can be forged. The suffering, the tragedy, the very weight of it all, that is the given. To complain about it is as absurd as complaining that the sea is wet or that stone is hard. The question was never how to escape the burden. The question was always, and only, how to carry it. And in the voluntary acceptance of that challenge lies the sole path to a life of profound, resonant meaning. It is the great paradox of the human condition. The thing that threatens to crush you is also the only thing that can give you the strength to stand. The weight you choose to bear, the cross you decide to pick up, ceases to be a mere instrument of torture. It becomes an anchor in the storm, a focal point for your energies, a purpose that transfigures the chaotic agony of existence into a heroic narrative. This is not a call to happiness. It is a call to arms. It is a demand that you stop waiting for the world to give you a reason to live, and instead, to give the world a reason for your life. It is the understanding that the light we so desperately seek is not found by fleeing the darkness. The light is forged in the darkness. The meaning of your life is the small, flickering flame that you cultivate and protect in the face of the howling, cosmic wind. This is the terrible, beautiful duty of consciousness. To see the world in all its horror and all its wonder, and to not turn away. To acknowledge the abyss, and to build a bridge across it, starting with the planks of your own disciplined, truthful, and courageous action. To bear the burden is to bear the light. And in that, and that alone, lies the redemption of our tragic and magnificent existence.